Her boss called her a relic, a ghost from a forgotten time. He didn't know how right he was. In the middle of a catastrophic failure, with a multi-million-dollar weapon system plummeting towards them, she uttered two words that would change everything. Two words that shouldn't exist. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The air over the airfield shimmered, a visible curtain of heat that distorted the distant hangars into wavering apparitions. The smell was a thick, cloying cocktail of hot asphalt and jet fuel, a perfume of raw power that clung to the back of the throat. Beneath it all, the constant low whine of distant engines provided a thrumming backdrop, a reminder of the immense, sleeping force coiled within this remote desert base. Under a temporary canopy, a gaggle of VIPs wilted in the sun, a mix of stern, uniformed generals and politicians whose crisp suits already looked rumpled and out of place. They shifted their weight, looking profoundly uncomfortable and impatient. Leading the procession was Colonel Marcus Thorne. In his mid-40s, Thorne possessed a face that looked as if it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun to cure. His demeanor was a match for his features, all hard angles and aggressive, impatient energy. His desert combat uniform was immaculate, a testament to military discipline, yet his sleeves were rolled up with precise folds, revealing powerful sun, browned forearms crisscrossed with pale scars. He was a man of action, a warrior who had clawed his way to his command through grit and fury. And he had little time for the niceties of bureaucracy or the delicate dance of politics. Trailing him by exactly 3 paces, a human shadow in the blinding glare, was Mira Chen. She appeared to be in her late 20s, the epitome of quiet, almost invisible efficiency. Her own uniform was neat to the point of being severe, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, unforgiving bun that left no room for stray strands. Her expression was neutral, a carefully constructed mask of professional blankness. She held a simple, old-fashioned clipboard to her chest, her fingers curled around its edge as if it were a shield. Thorne was in his element, his voice a sharp bark that cut through the engine noise with practiced authority. He had a young lieutenant pinned in his verbal sights, grilling him about the fuel, to air ratio of a new F-35 variant parked nearby. "Don't quote the manual at me, Lieutenant," Thorne snapped, his eyes like chips of ice. The manual was written in an air-conditioned office in Virginia. "I want to know what the ratio is right now in 115-degree heat with sand in the air. I want to know what happens when the filters get clogged mid-flight." He gestured dismissively over his shoulder, not bothering to look back at the woman who shadowed his every step. "Chen, are you getting this? Make a note. I want a full report on sub-system readiness for this entire wing by 1700. And don't give me the summary. I want the raw data, every single diagnostic reading." From her position 3 paces behind, Mira, without breaking stride or altering her placid expression, made a small, precise tick mark on a sheet of paper attached to her clipboard. Her voice was soft, yet carried with an unnerving clarity. "Already noted, Colonel." The power dynamic was as clear as the harsh desert sky. Thorne was the predator, the undisputed king of this domain, and Mira was just part of the scenery, an ignorable administrative function, no more notable than the humming generators or the distant shimmer of heat. The oppressive tension of the day, a product of the heat, the noise, and Thorne's own abrasive personality, seemed to thicken around them. The group moved on, their boots crunching on the gravel path that led towards the drone demonstration area. The centerpiece of the display was the Stalker, a new generation of autonomous reconnaissance drone. It was matte black, all sharp angles and predatory lines, looking less like a machine and more like a fossilized insect from a nightmare. It rested silently on its launch pad, a marvel of modern engineering that promised a new era of warfare. Thorne paused, the motion abrupt, causing the entire entourage to halt behind him. He turned, a smirk playing on his lips, as he looked directly at Mira, his eyes landing on the object she held. He reached out and tapped the clipboard with a thick finger, the sound a sharp rap in the relative quiet. "You know, Chen," he began, his voice loud enough for the nearby VIPs to hear, "in the 1990s, they had these amazing devices for this sort of thing. They were called laptops." A few of the politicians chuckled, eager to align themselves with the colonel's casual display of authority. Some of us have even moved on to tablets since then. "I'm surprised you're not using a quill and parchment." The mockery was blatant, a public jab designed to reinforce his own importance by diminishing hers, reminding everyone that he was a man of the future while she was an anachronism. Mira didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the stalker drone, her expression unchanging. When she finally spoke, her voice was as devoid of emotion as a machine's. "A clipboard requires no battery, Colonel. It cannot be hacked, and it survives a fall. It is the purest form of reliable data storage." Her response was so calm, so utterly logical, that it served as a subtle but potent form of defiance. It highlighted a different kind of strength, as one rooted in pragmatism and resilience, a strength Thorne, in his arrogance, failed to recognize. The lack of any emotional reaction from her only seemed to annoy him more. He had expected a flustered apology, or at least a flicker of embarrassment. He got nothing. With a grunt of disgust, he turned away. "Whatever, just keep up." The demonstration began, with a whisper, quiet hum that was shockingly discreet for a piece of military hardware. The stalker drone lifted off the ground. It performed a series of dazzlingly complex aerial maneuvers, banking and soaring, with a grace that drew audible gasps from the assembled crowd. It was a testament to technological wonder, a silent, deadly ballet in the sky. The drone climbed higher, a black speck against the piercing, cloudless blue of the desert sky. It was performing a high-altitude surveillance pattern, showcasing its ability to loiter for hours, an unseen eye watching over the battlefield. Then, suddenly, the whisper, quiet hum changed. It became a high-pitched, discordant shriek, a sound of mechanical agony that grated on the nerves and set teeth on edge. The drone lurched violently in the air, its graceful movements gone, replaced by a spastic, uncontrolled tremor. It began to spin, a terrifying, uncontrolled spiral that sent it plummeting out of the sky. Its trajectory was horribly, undeniably clear. It was falling directly towards the VIP canopy. Panic erupted. The carefully maintained military order dissolved into primal fear. Security personnel shouted useless commands, their voices swallowed by the drone's scream. People screamed, a chorus of terror as bodies scrambled for cover, tripping over one another in a desperate stampede away from the point of impact. In the midst of the pandemonium, Colonel Thorne reacted with pure instinct. His hand went to his hip, and with a fluid motion born of countless hours of training, he drew his sidearm, aiming it at the sky as if he could somehow shoot the problem out of existence. But in the heart of that chaos, Mira Chen was a statue of absolute calm. Her eyes, which had seemed so placid and vacant moments before, were now narrowed, her focus absolute and terrifyingly intense. She wasn't panicking, she was processing. Her mind, a whirlwind of calculations, tracked the drone's trajectory, assessed its velocity, and analyzed its spin rate. Then, just as Thorne bellowed, "Get down!" she did the precise opposite. She took one deliberate step forward, out from under the relative safety of the canopy. Her voice, when it came, was not the quiet, deferential tone of a logistics coordinator. It was a voice of chilling clarity and absolute authority, a voice that sliced through the panic and the shriek of the failing drone like a razor. It was a short, two-word phrase in a language no one present recognized, but the tone was unmistakable. It was not a request, it was a command. Nightingale Epsilon 0. The effect of her command was instantaneous and absolute. The drone froze midair. The high-pitched shriek cut out so abruptly that the resulting silence was a physical blow. For a single heart-stopping second, the multi-million-dollar piece of hardware hung suspended in the sky, defying gravity and all known laws of physics. Then, with a soft, unobtrusive thump, a parachute deployed from a hidden compartment. The black angular machine, which had been a harbinger of death just moments before, now drifted down to the asphalt with the impossible gentleness of a falling leaf. The crowd was frozen, their panicked flight arrested. They stared in stunned, open-mouthed disbelief, their gazes shifting from the gently descending drone to the woman who stood alone on the tarmac. Thorne slowly, mechanically, holstered his weapon. His face was a mask of fury, bewilderment, and a dawning, terrifying confusion. The world had tilted on its axis, and he was struggling to find his balance. He strode towards Mira, his boots crunching on the ground, each step a hammer blow of contained rage. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, his fingers digging into her flesh. He leaned in close, his face inches from hers, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was meant for her alone. "That command code was erased 5 years ago," he hissed, his eyes boring into hers, searching for an answer to a question he didn't even know how to ask. "It was part of a project that was buried so deep. Even I can't access the files. A project that officially never existed." Mira slowly turned her head to look at him, her expression utterly unreadable. The mask of neutrality back in place, but somehow different. Imbued with a new and unsettling depth. She didn't pull away from his grip. She simply raised her other hand, clicked the pen in her fingers, and made another precise, calm note on her clipboard. Then she met his furious gaze and replied with 2 simple, world-altering words. "I know." The silence that followed her 2 words was more profound than the shriek of the drone had been. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air and noise and chaos of the past few minutes into a single point of impossible reality centered on the woman with the clipboard. Thorne's grip on her arm, which had been an act of aggression, suddenly felt like an anchor, the only thing keeping him grounded as the world spun. He let go as if her skin had burned him. The VIPs were beginning to stir, their fear transmuting into a buzzing, questioning murmur. Security officers were cautiously approaching the now inert drone, their weapons still drawn. But Thorne saw none of it. His entire universe had collapsed to the space between him and Mira Chen. Without another word, he turned, his movement stiff and robotic. "This way," he commanded, his voice a low rasp. He didn't wait for a reply, simply began walking towards a squat, windowless tactical tent that had been erected near the command post. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, soundproofed and electronically sealed from the outside world. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she would be. He could feel her presence, that same quiet, unassuming shadow, but now it felt heavy, laden with secrets that could topple careers and rewrite history. He ripped open the sealed flap of the tent and practically threw her inside, the heavy canvas falling shut behind them with a thick, final thud. The cacophony of the airfield was gone, replaced by a humming, pressurized silence. The only light came from a single harsh LED strip overhead, casting their faces in stark, unforgiving detail. The air smelled of canvas, fire retardant, and the faint, sharp scent of ozone from the humming electronic countermeasures suite. It was a place designed for secrets, for interrogations, for breaking people down until the truth was all that was left. "Start talking," Thorne commanded, his voice low and tight, a compressed spring of fury and confusion. He prowled the small space, too full of violent energy to stand still. "Not in an hour, not after you filed a report in triplicate. Now, who are you?" Mira stood perfectly still, just inside the entrance, her clipboard held at her side, no longer a shield, but an accessory that now seemed absurdly out of place. Her placid expression held, a dam against his rage. "My name is Mira Chen," she stated, her voice as even and measured as if she were reading from a supply manifest. "Logistics Coordinator, 3rd Class, serial number 734982110. The sheer infuriating audacity of her response made something in Thorne snap. He slammed his open palm down on a metal folding table, the sound a gunshot in the confined space. The table buckled under the force. "I don't want your service record," he roared, his face inches from hers. "I want the truth. Project Nightingale was a ghost story, a myth they told tech recruits to scare them away from digging into black site budgets. Its command codes were supposedly wiped from every server on the planet, the digital equivalent of salting the earth. So, you're going to tell me how a third-class logistics clerk from nowhere knows a kill code that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs couldn't access?" For the first time, a flicker of something that wasn't blank neutrality crossed her face. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, more analytical. She met his furious gaze without blinking. The drone was a threat to personnel, including General Peterson and Congressman Bright. Its failure cascade was unpredictable. "My primary duty, as per military regulation 3-115, is to preserve military assets and personnel. I took the most effective action available to me to fulfill that duty." He stared at her, speechless. She was using the bureaucracy, the very system he despised, as a shield. She was hiding the greatest secret he had ever encountered behind the most mundane language imaginable. He felt a surge of something akin to admiration, so quickly followed by a fresh wave of rage that it made him dizzy. He was a man who solved problems with force and directness, and she was a living, breathing fortress of misdirection. He knew, with a sudden sinking certainty, that he would never break her. Not like this. He needed leverage. He needed a key. He backed away, running a hand over his cropped hair. "Fine," he said, the word clipped. "You're confined to quarters. You will speak to no one. You will touch no communications device. A guard will be posted outside your door. We're done here, coordinator." He spat the title like a curse. Back in his temporary Spartan office, a converted storage container with a desk, a chair, and a secure comms terminal, Thorne felt the walls closing in. The air was stale with the taste of recycled air and his own frustration. He initiated a secure video call, the screen flickering to life to show the face of a man he hadn't spoken to in years. Dave Jensen was a chief warrant officer at the Pentagon, a man who had made a career of being the gatekeeper to the military's deepest, darkest records. He looked grizzled, cynical, and profoundly tired. "Marcus," Dave said, his voice a gravelly sigh. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're calling to reminisce about that bar fight in Kandahar." "I need a file, Dave," Thorne said, cutting straight to the point. "Full, unredacted, eyes only. Names Chen, Mira, logistics." Dave took a long sip from a stained coffee mug. "Marcus, you know the drill. I need a justification code for an unredacted pull. The system's gotten tight. I can't just yank a file because you've got a bee in your bonnet. You want her dental records? Fine. You want the full jacket? I need a reason that won't get me audited by a 3-star general." Thorne's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. He leaned into the camera. "Justification is national security," he said, his voice low and intense. "Trust me on this, Dave. This is above my pay grade, and it's about to be above yours too if you don't get me that file." Dave stared at him for a long moment, his cynical eyes searching Thorne's. He must have seen the utter lack of bluff in the colonel's expression. With another weary sigh, he turned to a different screen. "National security it is. It's your funeral, Marcus." A few minutes of clicking passed in silence. Then, a file icon appeared on Thorne's screen. "There you go. Don't say I never did you any favors." Thorne opened the file. It was thin, suspiciously thin. It was a portrait of a perfectly average, unremarkable career. Top marks at logistics school, followed by a series of transfers between quiet supply depots on domestic bases: Fort Lee, Fort Hood, Nellis. No commendations, no disciplinary actions. No commendations was almost more suspicious than a list of infractions. In the modern military, they handed out medals for filing paperwork on time. Her record was a perfect, unbroken expanse of gray. It was the file of someone who had tried very, very hard to be completely invisible. "This is it?" Thorne snarled into the comms unit. "This is a ghost file, Dave. It's a cover. There's nothing here." Dave shrugged on the other end of the line, a gesture of bureaucratic helplessness. "It's what the system says it is, Marcus. The file is authenticated, triple verified. As far as the United States military is concerned, that's who she is. A boringly efficient logistics clerk." If there's another story, it's not one the system is telling. The call ended, leaving Thorne alone with the glowing screen and the ghost in the machine. The base grew quiet as night fell, the oppressive heat of the day bleeding out into the cold desert air. Thorne sat in his office, the thin, useless file of Mira Chen still open on his screen. He had hit a wall, a perfectly constructed, officially sanctioned wall, but he had one more card to play. He opened the portal to the military's classified archives, a network so deep and labyrinthine it was known colloquially as the Labyrinth. He typed in his search query, Project Nightingale. The system returned a single file, flagged with a classification level so high his screen flashed a crimson warning just for displaying the title. Most of it was inaccessible. A digital fortress of blacked-out paragraphs and redacted author names. It was a dead end, a story with all the pages torn out. He spent an hour trying to find a crack, a single loose thread, but found nothing. Frustrated, he was about to give up when he noticed a single, unredacted annex. It was a budget report from 6 years ago, probably an oversight by some long-forgotten censor. He clicked on it, his expectations low. His eyes scanned the columns of figures and project codes. Most of it was meaningless jargon. Then he saw it. A line item for $2 million allocated to something called cognitive interface research. A few lines below that, another entry. $65 million for biometric vocal command development. His heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. This was it. This was the root. He scrolled down, his eyes devouring the text, searching for a name, any name, and then he found one, tucked away under a sub, heading for lead project staff, a name that hadn't been blacked out, a single crack in the wall of secrecy. Lead analyst, Dr. Eris Thorne. He froze, his blood turning to ice. Thorne. The name screamed at him from the screen. His mind raced. A relative? A coincidence? The file had a note beside the name. Another small miracle of oversight. No relation to Colwyn Thorne, active duty. Someone had already checked. Someone had already made the connection and dismissed it. But he couldn't. He copied the name, Dr. Eris Thorne, and ran it through the Labyrinth's personnel database. He cross-referenced it with the personnel list for Project Nightingale. A single entry came back. Status, resigned, whereabouts unknown. And beneath it, a low-resolution ID photo. He leaned closer to the screen, his breath fogging the cold glass. The photo was grainy, the color washed out. But there was no mistaking the face. It was a younger woman, her hair worn loose, not in a severe bun. Her expression was not the blank, placid mask of a logistics clerk. Her eyes, sharp and fiercely intelligent, held a fire he had never seen in Mira Chen. There was a determined set to her jaw, the look of a brilliant mind, a creator, a warrior of a different kind. It was her. It was Mira Chen. Or rather, Mira Chen had never existed at all. He was looking at the face of Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead scientist of a phantom project, a woman who had officially vanished from the face of the earth 5 years ago, and he, Colonel Marcus Thorne, a simple soldier of dirt and action, had just stumbled into a secret so vast and so deep, he felt as if he were falling. He was completely and utterly out of his depth. The discovery left Colonel Thorne feeling like he was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. The ground beneath his feet, the solid, dependable reality of the military chain of command, had crumbled away, revealing a chasm of secrets he never knew existed. Dr. Eris Thorne, the architect of a phantom project, hiding in plain sight as a logistics clerk. He now held a truth that could detonate with the force of a bomb, but he had no idea who the enemy was or where the next attack would come from. He couldn't confront her, not yet. To do so would be to reveal his hand, to show this ghost that he could see her. For now, she had to remain Mira Chen, the woman with the clipboard, and he had to become a hunter in the shadows. He summoned 2 of his most trusted intelligence NCOs to his office. Sergeant Diaz was a wiry, patient man whose calm demeanor belied a razor-sharp mind for observation. Corporal Ives was younger, bigger, a former infantryman who moved with a quiet lethality and missed nothing. They stood before his desk, their expressions neutral, waiting. "We have a situation," Thorne began, his voice low. He didn't give them the whole story, just the barest of essentials. "Coordinator Chen is not what she appears to be. She may be a person of interest to a hostile foreign intelligence service. Starting now, she is under full surveillance." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto theirs. "I want to know when she breathes, when she sleeps, what she eats, and who she talks to. You will be her shadow, but a shadow she never sees. If she so much as sneezes in a way that looks suspicious, I want a report. You will not engage. You will not interfere. You will only watch and report. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir," they said in unison. The surveillance began, and for Thorne, it was an exercise in profound frustration. The reports from Diaz and Ives painted a portrait of mind-numbing predictability. They watched as Mira Chen went through her day with the metronomic precision of a clock. She inventoried crates of engine components in a dusty supply warehouse, her pen making precise, neat check marks on her forms. She filed requisitions for everything from printer toner to landing gear struts, her paperwork flawless, and submitted hours ahead of schedule. She ate her meals alone in the corner of the mess hall, reading a worn paperback, never speaking to anyone unless directly addressed. Her routine was a fortress of mundanity. so perfectly boring it felt like a deliberate, calculated act of camouflage. The only crack in the facade was her choice of reading material in her off hours. She didn't read novels or magazines. Diaz's reports noted that she spent hours in the base library, poring over dense, graduate-level technical manuals on quantum physics and advanced materials science. It was the one detail that didn't fit the picture of a simple clerk, a single bright thread in an otherwise gray tapestry. Thorne read the reports, his frustration mounting. He was watching a ghost, and the ghost was giving him nothing. Then, after a week of this maddening routine, something changed. Mira Chen submitted a request for a weekend pass to visit the small, sun-bleached town just outside the base perimeter. It was the first unpredictable thing she had done. Thorne approved it instantly, his instinct screaming that this was it. A move was being made. Diaz and Ives were already in position before she even signed out at the main gate. They followed her, melting into the sparse weekend crowds of the dusty town. She didn't go to a bar or a restaurant or a movie. She walked directly to the county public library, a squat brick building that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and decades of accumulated silence. She found an empty public computer terminal in a quiet corner and sat down. For the next hour, with Sergeant Diaz watching from behind a stack of periodicals, she did nothing but research the migratory patterns of the Arctic tern. She read articles, looked at maps of flight paths, and scrolled through ornithological databases. The topic was so bizarre, so utterly random, that Diaz was baffled. Finally, she printed out a few pages, tucked them into her pocket, and left the library, returning directly to the base. Diaz's report was delivered verbally to Thorne in his office. "Sir, with all due respect, I think we're on a wild goose chase. Or a tern chase, as it were," the sergeant said, a note of exasperation in his voice. "She spent an hour looking up birds, migratory patterns. That's it. She's either the most boring person on Earth, or she's playing us, making us waste our time on this nonsense." Thorne listened, a frown creasing his brow. It did sound like nonsense, a waste of resources. But a prickle of suspicion, a nagging itch at the back of his mind, wouldn't let him dismiss it. The name Aris Thorne was synonymous with a level of intelligence he could barely fathom. Such a person did nothing without a reason. "Which birds exactly, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice quiet. "The Arctic tern, sir. Longest migratory path of any animal on the planet, apparently." After Diaz left, Thorne sat at his own terminal. He typed Arctic tern into the standard military search engine. It returned exactly what he expected: pages of ornithological data, pictures of the white, graceful seabird. Nothing. But then he switched networks, diving into the labyrinth, the deep intelligence archive where the real secrets were kept. He typed the words again. This time, he got a hit. A single archaic file from the height of the Cold War. Arctic tern was not a bird. It was the code name for a defunct 1970s-era dead drop communication protocol. It was a system designed for deep cover agents to send a single, untraceable signal out into the void, a flare to let their handlers know they were alive and needed extraction or support. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into the digital ocean, hoping an old ally was still listening. Thorne stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over him. She didn't just look up a bird, she lit a flare. Thousands of miles away, in a sleek minimalist office that seemed to float among the clouds of an unnamed Asian city, a man named Kale stared at a wall of screens. The office was a study in monochrome, all white marble, black leather, and polished chrome, a sterile environment for a sterile man. Kale was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a new car, his face a cold, impassive mask. The screens before him displayed every scrap of data from the Stalker drone incident: telemetry, video feeds, and energy signature analysis. One of his technicians, a young man with sweat beading on his forehead, approached nervously. "Sir," the technician began, his voice trembling slightly, "we've finished the analysis of the override command. The energy signature, the syntax, the encryption layering. It's impossible." Kyle turned his head slowly, his eyes as cold and gray as a winter sea. "Define impossible," he said, his voice soft, but carrying an edge of absolute menace. The technician swallowed hard. "It's a Nightingale command, sir. An Epsilon-level key. The core programming is unmistakable." We thought, the archives state that the only person capable of issuing that command was gone. A long silence filled the room. Cale's eyes narrowed, a flicker of some powerful, long, dormant emotion stirring in their depths. He turned back to the screen, to a freeze frame of the chaotic scene on the airfield, and there, in the center of it all, was the blurred image of a woman in a military uniform, her face a mask of intense concentration. "She's alive," Kyle whispered, the words a puff of condensation in the cold air. A slow, predatory smile spread across his lips, a chilling sight. After all these years, the ghost is back on the board. He turned back to his trembling technician, his voice now filled with a renewed and terrible purpose. "Find her. I don't care what it costs or who you have to bribe. Find the woman who used that command. I want my legacy back." Back on the base, Eris Thorne, in the guise of Mira Chen, sat on the edge of her Spartan cot in her barracks room. She was performing a mundane, soldierly task, meticulously cleaning the mud and dust from her combat boots. To any observer, she was the picture of discipline and routine, but her senses were on high alert. She was waiting. She knew lighting the flare was a risk, a desperate gamble, but Cale's move with the stalker drone had forced her hand. She could no longer afford to simply watch and wait. As she worked the brush over the leather, she felt it. A silent, single vibration from inside the heel of her left boot. It was a sensation no one else could have detected. She finished her task with methodical slowness, her expression unchanging. She waited until the barracks were empty, until she was completely and utterly alone, shrouded by the quiet of the late night. Then, she carefully pried the inner sole from the boot. Tucked into a custom, carved recess in the hard rubber heel was a small, flat device, no bigger than a thumbnail, a marvel of miniaturized technology. She pressed a nearly invisible stud on its side, and a tiny low-light screen glowed to life. An encrypted single-use message appeared, the text simple and stark. "The flock is scattered. Old nests are being watched. Stay quiet. The architect is looking for you." Her face remained passive, a mask of stone, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the tiny device. Her fears were confirmed. The message was from one of the few other Nightingale survivors, a scattered network of ghosts like herself. And the warning was clear: the architect. It was Cale's nickname for himself back in the project, a title born of his arrogance and his genius. He was hunting her. The quiet life she had so carefully constructed for 5 years was officially over. With a single sharp clench of her fist, she crushed the device in her hand, reducing it to a worthless pile of plastic and fractured circuits. She disposed of the fragments in 3 separate locations, ensuring they could never be reassembled. The game had changed. She was no longer the watcher. She was the prey. The days that followed settled into a new kind of tension, a quiet, simmering state of high alert that hummed just beneath the surface of the base's monotonous routine. For Aris, every moment was a calculation, every footstep behind her, every shadow that stretched too long in the afternoon sun, every unfamiliar face in the mess hall was a potential threat. She was a ghost being hunted, and the desert, once a sanctuary of anonymity, now felt like a vast, open cage. She continued her duties as Mira Chen with a placid, unshakable calm that was, in itself, her most formidable weapon. The clipboard remained her constant companion, its familiar weight a comfort, its surface a shield of bureaucratic normalcy. She knew Cale. He was brilliant, vain, and pathologically incapable of letting go of a perceived slight. The drone incident was not just a test of the network, it was a message to her, a declaration that he knew she was alive. Her flare, the Arctic turn signal, had been an answer, a confirmation that she was ready. Now, the waiting was over. The game was afoot. The afternoon sun was a relentless hammer, beating down on the dusty path that ran between 2 enormous windowless supply warehouses. The air was thick with heat, and the smell of hot metal radiating from the corrugated steel walls. Eris was walking her usual inventory route, clipboard in hand. To any observer, she was the picture of diligence, her eyes scanning the stenciled numbers on the warehouse doors. But her senses were stretched taut, a web of awareness that extended far beyond her immediate surroundings. She was listening to the rhythm of the bass, the distant roar of a jet, the rumble of a supply truck, the crunch of boots on gravel, and she heard something that didn't belong. A buzz. It was high, pitched, and close, but it lacked the organic, chaotic cadence of a desert insect. She kept walking, her pace unchanged, her eyes not deviating from their task. She didn't look for the source. Looking would be a tell. Instead, she expanded her peripheral vision, letting the world bleed into the edges of her sight. And then, she saw it. A dragonfly. It hovered near the corner of the warehouse roof, its iridescent wings catching the sun. But it was wrong. It was slightly too large, its body a fraction too thick. Its movements were a series of impossibly precise adjustments, tiny, jerky shifts that were mechanical, not fluid. It wasn't hovering, it was holding a position. A tiny, almost invisible lens, no larger than a pinhead, glinted in the harsh light. A single, cold point of observation. A micro-drone. Cale's work had always been characterized by a blend of elegance and brutality. This was his signature, a beautiful, deadly insect come to watch her. Her training, buried for 5 long years under layers of logistics codes and supply manifests, kicked in with the force of instinct. She knew it was there to observe, to confirm her identity beyond any doubt. Or worse. The feeling of being watched by something so utterly inhuman sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the desert heat. It was the cold, dispassionate gaze of a machine, an extension of Cale's own cold, dispassionate will. Her eyes, still pretending to scan inventory numbers, flicked towards the drone for a split second, a movement so brief it would be imperceptible to a human observer, but one she knew the drone's high-speed optics would register. In that fraction of a second, she saw it. A minuscule aperture, a tiny, dark circle, opened on the drone's underside. There was no time for thought, no time for analysis, only action. In one single fluid motion that was a masterpiece of calculated clumsiness, she pretended to trip. Her foot caught on an uneven patch of asphalt, a flaw in the pavement she had noted weeks ago. She didn't fight the fall, she embraced it, letting her body go limp, her forward momentum carrying her into a stumbling, uncontrolled lurch. Her clipboard, her shield, flew from her hands, the papers scattering as it clattered loudly against the ground, a perfect piece of misdirection. She fell to one knee, her head ducked low, her body angled away from the drone, making the whole thing look like an embarrassing, clumsy accident, the kind of mishap that would befall a distracted clerk. At that exact moment, a sound like a wasp's sting cut through the air, a tiny, needle-like projectile, almost invisible against the bright sky, whizzed through the space where her neck had been just a moment before. It traveled with incredible velocity, embedding itself with a soft, sickening thwip into the weathered wooden frame of a distant window on the adjacent warehouse. The sound was swallowed almost instantly by the vastness of the desert, a secret whispered between the hunter and the hunted. Sergeant Diaz, concealed in a sniper's nest of his own making on the rooftop of a nearby barracks, saw the whole thing through his high-powered binoculars. He had been watching Mira Chen for days, and his professional boredom had been curdling into genuine suspicion. Her routine was too perfect, her demeanor too controlled. He had seen the dragonfly, and like Oris, he had registered its unnatural stillness. The metallic glint that didn't belong. He had zoomed in on it just as Chen began her fall. He saw the stumble that looked just a little too perfect, a little too practiced for a simple trip. Then he saw the glint, a flash of light from the drone, followed by the impossibly fast straight line of the projectile. He tracked it to the window frame, his blood running cold. He keyed his radio, his voice low and urgent, stripped of all his earlier exasperation. "Colonel Thorne, this is Diaz. We have a situation. Chen just took a fall, but it was a dodge. I'm confirming a hostile action. I saw a glint, a projectile fired from a micro-drone. She was the target." Thorne was already moving before Diaz finished his sentence. "Secure the area," he barked into his own radio, his voice a whip crack of command as he burst from his office. "Find what it fired. I'm on my way." He arrived on the scene to find Aris brushing the dust from her uniform, her face a perfect mask of mild embarrassment and frustration. A small crowd of onlookers was already beginning to gather, drawn by the sight of the scattered papers. "You all right, Chen?" Thorne asked, his voice deliberately casual, but his eyes were scanning the area, missing nothing, his gaze sharp and predatory. "Fine, Colonel, just clumsy," she replied, her voice steady, not a hint of the adrenaline he knew must be coursing through her veins. She bent to gather her papers, her movements calm and deliberate. Diaz's voice came over Thorne's earpiece. "Sir, second-story window, warehouse 7, frame 3. Thorne's eyes snapped to the location. He strode over, waving away the curious onlookers. "Get back to your duties," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. He located the impact point. To the naked eye, it was nothing more than a tiny splinter in the wood. Using a pair of tweezers from a small kit he always carried, he carefully, expertly began to work the object free. It was tiny, no bigger than an eyelash, and exquisitely crafted. He extracted it and held it in the desert sun. It was a flechette, a sophisticated tranquilizer dart made of a clear, crystalline material that was almost invisible. A small reservoir within it held a single drop of a viscous, oily fluid. The proof was undeniable, cold and sharp and deadly. This was a state-sponsored assassination attempt, carried out on his base under his command. The mystery of Mira Chen had just become the reality of protecting Dr. Aris Thorne. He was no longer just an investigator, he was a bodyguard. In his sterile, sky-high office, Cale watched the video feed from the micro-drone. It was corrupted, dissolving into a waterfall of static and garbled code at the exact moment the dart was fired. An anti-forensic protocol Aris herself had designed years ago. A final digital middle finger from beyond the grave. "Report," he snapped, his voice dangerously quiet. The technician, the same young man from before, flinched as if struck. "The target evaded, sir," he stammered, not daring to meet Cale's gaze. "It appears she tripped. The dart was lost. The drone self, destructed as per its programming after the data burst." The technician paused, then added a crucial piece of information. "But we have a positive biometric and facial recognition match from the moments before the attempt. The system cross referenced it against the old Nightingale personnel files. It's her, sir. 100% confirmation. Dr. Aris Thorne is alive, and she is on that base." Cale stared at the frozen, grainy image of Aris's face on the screen, captured a millisecond before she began her fall. The look of intense concentration, the fire in her eyes, it was all there. A slow, cold smile spread across his lips. It was not a smile of humor, but of deep, chilling satisfaction. The ghost was real. "Good," he said softly. He turned to the technician, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "She can't hide behind a clipboard forever. She's resourceful. I'll give her that." He looked back at the screen, at the face of the woman who had built his kingdom and then tried to deny him the keys. "It's time we stopped playing with insects. Prepare the main event." The hunt was over. The war was about to begin. Thorne didn't take her back to her barracks. He didn't say a word, simply gesturing with his head for her to follow as he strode past the turnoff to the residential quarters. His silence was heavier and more menacing than his earlier rage had been. He led her deep into the base's command structure, through corridors of polished concrete that grew colder and narrower the deeper they went. They passed through 2 separate keycard checkpoints, the buzz of the electronic locks loud in the humming silence. He brought her to a small, windowless room, its walls bare except for sound-dampening foam. A single metal table and 2 chairs were bolted to the floor. It was a secure interrogation room, a place where secrets came to die. He gestured for her to sit, then walked to the table and placed a small, clear plastic evidence bag in the center of it. Inside, suspended in the sterile plastic, was the crystalline flechette, the tiny, elegant instrument of death that had been meant for her. The game was over. The pretense had been shattered. "The games are over, Chen," Thorne said, his voice a low, flat rumble that held no room for argument. He leaned his knuckles on the table, his gaze pinning her to the chair. "Or should I say, Dr. Thorne, I know who you are. I've seen the files, the real ones. More importantly, they know who you are. You have a target on your back the size of this base, and that makes my command a hunting ground. I can't protect a ghost. I can't fight an enemy I don't understand. I need you to talk to me. Now." Aris looked at the dart, glinting under the harsh overhead light. She saw in its sharp, clear lines the reflection of Cale's mind, his obsession with perfection, his utter disregard for life. Then she looked up at Thorne's hard, determined face. She saw the fury there, but underneath it, she saw something else, something she hadn't expected. He wasn't just a blunt instrument of military power. He was a commander who had just seen one of his own targeted on his soil, and his expression was that of a protector, a guardian whose walls had been breached. The mask of Mira Chen, the quiet, unassuming logistics coordinator, finally fell away. It didn't shatter, it simply dissolved, revealing the profound, soul-deep weariness of a woman who had been holding a terrible secret for 5 long years. A slow, deliberate nod was her only answer. It was enough. "My real name is Dr. Eris Thorne," she said, her voice quiet, but it was her own voice now, holding a resonance and confidence that Mira Chen's had never possessed. "And you're right, Colonel. We are all in a great deal of danger." She stood, and Thorne, after a moment's hesitation, stepped aside, letting her lead the way. She guided him back through the cold corridors, back into the warm desert night, and towards the anonymous block of her barracks. The guard he had posted outside her door snapped to attention as they approached. Thorne dismissed him with a wave of his hand. Inside, the room was exactly as he expected, Spartan, neat, and utterly impersonal. It was a room designed to be forgotten, but she didn't stop in the middle of the room. She walked to the far wall, a seemingly solid expanse of painted cinder block. She reached out and pressed her palm flat against the wall, then her fingers tapped a sequence against the rough surface, a silent, rhythmic code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hiss of displaced air, a section of the wall slid sideways, revealing a hidden alcove. Thorne stared, his breath catching in his throat. The space within was bathed in the cool blue and green glow of active electronics. It was a miniature, self-contained command center. A compact, hardened server rack hummed quietly, its fans whispering. Beside it, a sophisticated satellite communication array was folded into the wall, its dish aimed at a concealed vent in the ceiling. And at the center of it all was a custom-built interface, a cascade of screens displaying lines of code, network traffic, and global satellite imagery. It was a technological marvel, a secret arsenal hidden behind the facade of the most boring room on the base. "I built this myself," she said, her voice now holding the calm, unshakable confidence of an expert in her element. "It's how I've been monitoring the network and Kale for the last 5 years." Thorne felt a wave of dizzying respect. He was a man who understood power in the form of tanks and jets and battalions of soldiers. He was looking at a different kind of power, a silent, invisible force that could touch any corner of the globe from a closet in the desert. Standing in the glow of her hidden world, Eris told him everything. The words, held back for so long, came out in a steady, controlled stream, a confession and a briefing all in one. "Project Nightingale wasn't just about drone control, Colonel," she began, her eyes fixed on a screen displaying the complex, beautiful architecture of her original code. That was just the most visible application. It was a fully autonomous, AI-driven strategic network. It could predict enemy movements with 98% accuracy. It could manage global supply chains in real time, rerouting shipments around storms or political instability. It could run battlefield logistics with zero human input, ensuring that ammunition and medical supplies arrived exactly where they were needed, seconds before they were needed. It was designed to save lives, thousands of them. It was designed to make war more precise, more efficient, and ultimately, less bloody. She paused, her expression darkening as she turned from the screen to face him. "My superior, the project director, was Dr. Kale. He was a genius, but he had no moral compass. He saw Nightingale not as a tool for saving lives, but as a product, the most valuable weapon ever created, and he wanted to sell it to the highest bidder. He wanted to remove the ethical constraints, the core commandments I had hardwired into its programming, rules against targeting civilians, against escalating conflicts, against autonomous lethal action without final human consent. When I refused to give him the keys, when I told him I would burn the whole project to the ground before I let him turn it into a tool for global blackmail, he arranged an accident, a car crash on a mountain road. It was supposed to be clean, tragic, but I survived. The world, and more importantly Kale, thought I was dead." She took a breath, the memory still raw. "I knew he would never stop looking for a way to control Nightingale, so I disappeared. I erased Eris Thorne. I created Mira Chen, a woman with a boring past and no future. I joined the Logistics Corps because it was the perfect place to hide. Who would ever look for the architect of the world's most advanced artificial intelligence in a dusty warehouse counting spare parts? It gave me access to the military's network, a place to watch from. I've been here for 5 years, monitoring the system, patching vulnerabilities Kale didn't know existed, and waiting. Waiting for him to make a move, to try and reclaim his prize. The drone incident, the malfunction, that was him. It was his first real attempt to knock on the door. Thorne processed the information, his mind, trained for battlefield strategy, racing to catch up. The scale of it was staggering. This wasn't about a single rogue drone or a stolen piece of tech. It was about the potential hijacking of the most powerful strategic weapon ever conceived. "What does he want now?" he asked, his voice grim. "He doesn't just want one drone," Eris said, her voice turning hard as steel. "He wants the whole system. He wants Nightingale. With it, he could hold global infrastructure hostage. He could cripple financial markets, shut down power grids, turn every automated system on the planet into a weapon. He doesn't want to be a king, Colonel. He wants to be a god." The drone hack was a test. He was checking to see if the old lock still worked. "Now that he knows I'm alive, he's not testing anymore. He's coming for the crown jewels." Thorne's expression hardened. The confusion and anger were gone, burned away, and replaced by the cold, clear focus of a field commander who finally had a clear enemy and a defined battlefield. He looked at her, at this brilliant, haunted woman who had been fighting a secret war all on her own. He looked at the incredible secret arsenal she had built in a broom closet. He was a soldier, and he had been given a mission. "All right, Dr. Thorne," he said, the name now a title of respect. "You've been on defense for 5 years. It's time to go on offense. What do you need?" A flicker of relief, so profound it was almost painful, crossed Eris's face. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't alone. She looked at her desk, where her old-fashioned clipboard was sitting. She picked it up. It wasn't a clipboard. With a click, the paper and pressboard facade fell away, revealing a hardened, custom-built tablet interface, its screen glowing with the same complex data as her main console. It was her command interface, her scepter. "I need access," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Full, unrestricted access to the base's central command console. And I need you to trust me, completely." Thorne nodded without a moment of hesitation, his decision absolute. "You've got it," he said. "Let's get you your lab back." The alliance was forged, not in a treaty or a handshake, but in a shared understanding in a secret room under the silent, watchful eyes of a hidden war machine. The ghost and the soldier were now on the same side, and the real battle was about to begin. The first siren was a lone, piercing shriek that cut through the calm of the desert night. It was followed a second later by another, then another, until the entire base was submerged in a cacophony of wailing alarms and automated, bellowing warnings. Lights flickered violently in the corridors, plunging them into strobing, disorienting darkness before flaring back to life. On the runways, a nightmare was unfolding. The engines of every drone on the base, from the small reconnaissance units to the large, heavy payload bombers, roared to life simultaneously. Their navigation lights, normally blinking in a calm, synchronized rhythm, now flashed in a chaotic, unsynchronized panic of red and green and white. A swarm of angry, awakened insects. Kale's attack had begun, not as a subtle infiltration, but as a full frontal digital siege. Inside the main command center, the scene was one of pure chaos. Technicians, men and women, trained to be the calm, collected nerve center of the base, shouted in panic and frustration. Their consoles, moments before displaying orderly streams of data, were now filled with cascading lines of gibberish, mocking error messages, and, on the main screen, a stylized angular logo of a bird of prey, Kale's personal sigil. They were locked out. Every keyboard was unresponsive, every command rejected. They were blind, deaf, and helpless, passengers in their own command center as an unseen enemy seized the controls. The air, normally cool and sterile, grew thick with the smell of ozone from overloaded circuits and the sharp, acrid scent of fear. Thorne strode into the chaos like a storm front. His presence a physical force that seemed to push back against the panic. His voice, honed by years of command on active battlefields, cut through the din with absolute authority. "Everybody out! Now! Clear this room!" he roared. There was no hesitation. The technicians, grateful for a clear order in the midst of madness, scrambled from their stations and fled, leaving Thorn alone in the heart of his compromised kingdom. A moment later, Eris followed him in. She was an island of impossible calm in the swirling sea of alarms and flashing lights. Her face was set in a mask of intense concentration, her movements economical and precise. She walked directly to the main command console, the one displaying Kale's arrogant logo. From her hardened tablet, the device that had once been a clipboard, she unspooled a single, thin cable of woven fiber optics. With a steady hand, she plugged it into a diagnostic port just below the main screen, a port no one had used in years. The main screen flickered. Kale's logo dissolved into a shower of pixels, replaced instantly by Eris's own interface, a clean, minimalist design of cool blues and whites, elegant and ruthlessly efficient. In that moment, she was no longer Mira Chen, the clerk, or even Eris Thorn, the fugitive. She was the architect, and she was taking back her kingdom. Her fingers flew across the surface of her tablet, the custom interface mirroring her actions on the main screen. Lines of code scrolled past at a dizzying speed, diagnostic windows opened and closed, and a three-dimensional map of the base's network architecture appeared, pulsing with angry red light. "He's good," she murmured, her voice a low, focused hum. "He's bypassed the primary firewalls and is rewriting the core command protocols from the root. He's not just trying to control the drones, he's trying to turn the entire fleet into his own private army, loyal only to him." The next hour was a blur of intense, silent warfare. Eris was the conductor of a symphony of digital defense, her hands moving with a speed and precision that seemed superhuman. Thorn stood beside her, her anchor and her weapon in the physical world. He had never felt more useless and more essential at the same time. He was a soldier on a battlefield he couldn't see, his only orders coming from the calm, focused woman beside him. "Colonel, I need you to physically sever the fiber optic connections to hangars 5 and 7, Eris commanded, her eyes never leaving the screen where a hostile data stream was pouring into the system. "He's using them as a backdoor to bypass my initial blocks. Go now." Thorn didn't question it. He relayed the orders into his comms unit, and he could hear the sound of his soldiers scrambling to follow his commands, their boots pounding on the concrete. A voice, distorted and smug, suddenly filled the room, broadcast over the command center's internal speakers. It was Kale, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "You can't fight me in my own house, Aris," he taunted. "This is my design now. I've had 5 years to study your work, to find its flaws, to improve it. You are a relic. I am the future." Aris ignored him, her focus absolute. On the screen she erected a new firewall, a complex wall of code that momentarily stemmed the flow of Kale's attack. He immediately began hammering at it, the red on her network map pulsing with renewed intensity. "He's creating a cascade failure in the power grid," she said, her voice tight. "He's trying to force a full system shutdown on his own terms, so he can reboot it with his protocols in place. Colonel, I need all auxiliary power rerouted to the primary server core, here in this building. Strip it from everywhere else if you have to. We have to protect the heart of the system, the original Nightingale code." Again, Thorn relayed the orders, turning the base into a physical extension of her will. The battle was a high-stakes chess match played at the speed of light, with Aris and Kale as the grandmasters and the multi-billion-dollar military base as the board. For every move Kale made, Aris had a counter. He tried to corrupt the navigation systems. She isolated them. He attempted to seize control of the base's automated defenses. She locked them down. It was a battle of wits, of pure intellect and will, and the fate of the base, and perhaps the world, hung on every command she gave. Then, Kale made his final move. With a surge of overwhelming processing power, he shattered her last firewall and flooded the system. The screens in front of Aris flickered, her clean blue interface dissolving back into Kale's mocking, triumphant logo. A single word appeared beneath it. "Checkmate." She was locked out. Her tablet went dark in her hands. "It's over, Aris," Kale's voice echoed through the command center, no longer smug, but filled with the cold, absolute certainty of victory. "This system now belongs to me." On the tarmac, the chaotic flashing of the drone's lights stopped. They now blinked in perfect, sinister unison. With a series of heavy, mechanical clicks that could be heard even inside the command center, the drones began to arm their weapons. Missile pods opened, gun turrets swiveled, and targeting lasers painted the empty runways. Thorne drew his sidearm, a useless, instinctive gesture against an army of killer machines. "What now, Doctor?" he asked, his voice grim. Eris stood motionless for a second, her face pale in the crimson glow of the warning lights. Then she turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not defeat, but a final desperate spark of defiance. "He's a brilliant thief, Colonel, but he only stole the house. He doesn't own it. He can't replicate the original key." She took a deep breath. "I need the base-wide broadcast system. All channels, now." Thorne stared at her, then nodded, moving to a manual override panel. He flipped a series of switches. "You have it." Eris walked to the main communication microphone. She looked at Thorne, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a single sharp nod. "Trust. Absolute." She keyed the microphone, and her voice, the same voice that had stopped a single falling drone, now boomed across every corner of the base, from the mess hall to the motor pool, and out onto the runways where the automated army waited. It was not a shout, but it was filled with an undeniable power, a biometric signature Kale could never hope to fake. She spoke a single resonant phrase, a command that was the antithesis of the kill code she had used before. Nightingale Genesis Prime. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Kale's laughter echoed over the speakers. "Sentimental nonsense, Eris. Your voice is just a ghost in the machine." But he was wrong. The system wasn't just code, it was her. The Genesis Prime command wasn't a request to the software. It was a fundamental hardwired reboot command that spoke directly to the core hardware, a command that could only be triggered by her voice and her voice alone. On the tarmac, the drones froze. Their weapon systems retracted with a series of soft clicks, their engines spooled down, the roar fading into a hum, then into a profound, echoing silence. Inside the command center, every screen went black. The alarms cut out. The emergency lights died, plunging the room into absolute darkness and silence. They had won. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Then, the lights flickered back on, not the harsh red of the emergency, but the steady normal white of standard power. The screens rebooted, displaying not Kale's logo or Aris's interface, but the standard, boring military login screen. The system was clean. It was theirs again. Thorne slowly holstered his weapon, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at Aris, who was leaning against the console, the adrenaline finally leaving her. "Is it over?" he asked. "He's locked out," she said, her voice weary but firm. "The system has reverted to its factory settings. He can't get back in. We're safe for now." Thorne walked over to her, standing not as a colonel to a subordinate, but as a partner. "You were on defense for 5 years, Doctor," he said, his voice filled with a deep newfound respect. "Today, you went on offense. What's next?" Eris looked up at him, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. The ghost was gone. The hunted prey was gone. In her place stood a woman who had reclaimed her name and her purpose. "Next, Colonel," she said, picking up her tablet, its screen now glowing with potential, "we go hunting." The war wasn't over, but the battle for the soul of Nightingale had been won, and a new, formidable alliance had just been born in the heart of the desert.